Welcome to my channel. I'm Scott, and in this video we're going to talk about real estate. Have you ever seen those YouTube channels where someone's driving in a Lamborghini and a YouTuber asks, "What do you do for a living?" And the guy says, "I'm a real estate developer." How do they make so much money? Well, obviously it's not luck. It takes a lot of time, skill, money, know-how to make it that big. As you know on this channel, I like to do a lot of education, break things down and explain things. So what exactly is real estate development? It's pretty much when someone builds a new structure or modifies an existing one to increase that property's value. So real estate development is turning property or land into an apartment complex, a strip mall, an office building, an industrial complex, and so much more. So the developer pretty much completes the project from start to finish. So once the project is complete, they sell the property to a real estate investor or directly to the end consumer. So if you're a real estate investor or developer, you can make massive returns or lose your shirt. So you might be asking, how do I get started? How do I get into this business? A lot of people get started by working in the industry or working in a related industry. Some people start out as real estate agents. A common stepping stone is someone who flips homes for a quick profit. Since the construction part is so important to the process, a lot of people start out in construction and then become real estate developers. Another option is just to work at a real estate development company. Of course, if your parents have deep pockets, it makes it a lot easier to enter this industry. But most of us are not that fortunate. We have to work our way up through the ladder. I'm going to jump ahead a few steps and show you the closing statement. Say you find a property and you want to acquire it. You're going to see something called the closing statement. And this is a pretty common document in a real estate transaction. It lists all the expenses associated with the closing. Say I have a company, it's called Acme Inc., and I want to buy a property in Ross, California. And I'm looking to close mid-2023. And I do some due diligence and I feel $1 million is appropriate. That's how much the seller is selling it for. So the top part of the closing statement is what's due to the seller at the closing. So $1 million is due to the seller. And since the seller paid their county taxes for the entire year of 2023, they paid $30,000. But they only have access to the property for the first half of the year. For the second half of the year, I'm going to own it. So I have to give them $15,000 because they prepaid for the entire year. Same thing for school taxes. So in December, they paid $44,000 for all of their 2023 school taxes. So since I'll have use of the property in the second half of the year, I have to compensate the seller $22,000. During the initial negotiation, the seller asked me to give him $100,000 as a good faith down payment to make sure he knew I was serious about buying the property. So that $100,000 is due to me, the buyer. So once we close the transaction on June 30th, I owe the seller $937,000. The $1,037,000 minus the $100,000. But there's other fees I have to pay at closing. There's the recording fee. So a company charges this fee to record your deed so you now illegally own the property. Since we're in Marin County, they'll go to the office in San Rafael. That's where the government office is to record the deed. Then you have to pay a company $2,500 for title insurance. This protects me, the owner, against liens or defects in the title. Then you pay $700 to a survey company. They survey the land, maybe identify some improvements, look for easements or encroachments. I remember when I took the real estate exam, the question on encroachment, I got it right because I watch football. This is when a defensive player makes contact with an offensive player before the snap. That's encroachment, that's a penalty. Then of course I have to pay my lawyer, that's $2,500. So the fees at closing are $59.25. Plus I have to pay the seller $937,000. So at closing, I need $942,925. So it seems like we did a lot of work already, but if you're a real estate developer, this is the very beginning of the process. You still need to erect a building and market it. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Let's go to the next section, talking about how you make money. So let's say you purchase a piece of land for $400,000, and then you coordinate a crew of people to make a nice building. The expenses are $600,000. To pretty much complete the project, it costs you $1 million. And say you do some marketing and you sell that building for $1.5 million, you made a $500,000 profit. That's a 50% margin. $500,000 over your cost basis of $1 million. That's a pretty nice return. And say it took you 6 months. You're loving life. $500,000 in 6 months? Just do that again. You make $1 million in 1 year. If it was only that easy. This is a more likely scenario. You purchase a piece of land for $400,000. Expenses are $700,000. There's a few hiccups along the way. Your plumber did a bad job. You had to fire them and replace them with another plumber. It cost you money, so that's why your expenses were higher in this scenario. So your all-in cost of $1.1 million. It takes you a year to finish the project. The commercial real estate market is getting a little more depressed as time goes on, so you could only sell the property for $1.2 million. In your original base case, it was $1.5 million. So you did squeak out a little profit, which is nice, $100,000 profit. It's only a 9% margin. It's a lot of work for 9%. But you weren't able to come up with the $1.1 million, so you had 3 investors come in. All 4 parties split the investment 4 ways, 25% each. So your share is $25,000. So 1 year of work, you made $25,000. You can't even feed your family. If you spent the entire year on this project and only had $25,000, you'd be pretty depressed. But if you had many projects going on, maybe some were more profitable than others, maybe it's not so bad. Let's look at a third scenario. You buy that piece of land for $400,000. There's more problems than expected. You have this huge mold problem that eats into your margins. Expenses are a lot higher, $800,000. The all-in cost is $1.2 million. It took you a year and a half to complete the project, and you're getting desperate to sell because you want to recoup some of your investment. So you eventually sell it for $800,000. That's a loss of $400,000, which means your margins are negative 33%. The only bright spot is you split the project with someone else, so your loss is $200,000, not $400,000. But if this was your first project, this could bankrupt you. This could put you under. So it takes a lot of time and expertise to become profitable and to make a lot of money in this business. A way to mitigate your risk is not to take any equity in the deal. Just charge a fee. Some developers charge a fee of 5% to 10%. And of course, if they think the project is really lucrative, then they could put some money into it and have an equity stake. And then of course, if they do turn around and sell that property for a big profit, then they'll make a lot more than 5 or 10%. So you probably want to know, what do developers do? They do a lot. They pretty much do everything. It's like running a company for 6 months, a year, or longer. So much can happen. To start, they have to look at zoning regulations. They study the neighborhoods. They do lots of due diligence. And they have to do this well before they pitch to investors or lenders. And that's another skill set in itself, to find people willing to invest in a project. And then they finally fund the deal. They have to create its own entity, like an LLC or corporation. They need to create a budget and track that budget throughout the process to make sure they're not going over. They have to create a detailed plan and timeline, and things don't always go as expected. There's always hiccups along the road. They have to do a lot of hiring, some firing. They have to hire contractors, architects, engineers, designers, plumbers. So many different people they have to hire. And they can't just hire people, they have to do a lot of coordination. Like, they can't hire the painter and have them come and paint the whole place before the plumber and electrician come. And what if the plumber takes a lot longer than expected? Then they have to tell the painter, you have to come back a month later. And what if the painter has something already scheduled a month later? Then they have to find another painter. So there's a ton of coordination involved. And location accessibility is important. Not every location has easy access to electricity, water, food. If it takes 30 minutes to get to the closest grocery store, that could delay your project. The developer may meet with the governmental authorities to get the proper permitting. Even if the developer is not meeting with the county to get the permits, they're meeting with the person who's going to meet with the county. So they're part of every conversation. They have to guide the team through the entire project life cycle from start to finish. And the developer is like the fire department. They're constantly putting out fires. There's always things going wrong. And the better you are at figuring things out and getting things done efficiently, the more profitable the project's going to be. And it may seem obvious, but the best developers are the ones who have the most projects under their belt. the ones who've done it the most. And then it may take you 6 months to a year to build this beautiful building or beautiful shopping center, but you have to do a lot of marketing. Hopefully you were doing marketing before the project was completed. Let's talk about valuing commercial real estate. Say you're a real estate investor and you want to know how to value a property. There's lots of ways to do it, but 4 really common ones are the comparable approach, using cap rates, replacement costs, and gross rent multiplier. If you want to buy residential real estate, the comparable approach is almost always used. Because residential real estate is really liquid, there's usually lots of homes that are in a similar neighborhood of a similar size. So the comparable approach is pretty easy. And plus, there's so much information out there on residential real estate. Commercial real estate is not as easy, but you could compare properties in similar areas of similar size. You might compare the square footage, the location, type of construction, year built, lots of different things. But usually this approach is used when a property is vacant or semi-vacant, because people generally buy commercial real estate because it's a revenue generating asset. They don't buy it just to own a property like for residential, unless of course they were renting out that residential property. But if you buy a home to live in, you don't think of it as a revenue generating asset. The cap rate method is probably the most common because the value of the property is really pegged to how much income it generates. The cap rate is simply net operating income over total purchase price. Net operating income is similar to EBITDA. So it doesn't matter if you take on debt or use cash to buy the property, it kind of strips that out of the calculation. So let's say all in it cost you $1 million to acquire the property, and the annual net income, the rental income minus the operating expenses, is $100,000, so the cap rate is 10%. A high cap rate generally indicates higher risk, while a low cap rate is lower risk but lower returns. So the sweet spot seems to be 5 to 10%, but you want to also look at this as an investment. Is the rental income dependable? How do you think the future of the neighborhood is going to be? Will it thrive or will it start to suffer? So there's other things involved, not just the cap rate, but it's a great benchmark to get started. Another valuation approach is replacement costs. This method is usually combined with other valuation methods. You would try to figure out how much it would cost to replace the asset, buy a similar sized piece of land in a similar neighborhood, erect a similar type of building, and if it cost you $1 million to do all of that, then you probably wouldn't want to pay a lot more than $1 million for the property. But once again, this doesn't take into account the profits that asset will generate. Another approach is the gross rent multiplier. This ties profitability to the rents you receive or you expect to receive. So it's a total purchase price over gross rents. So it pretty much tells you how many years it would take to pay off the property just off the rent. So let's say you bought a small office building. It only had 2 offices in it. It was $100,000, and you charge each tenant $5,000 a year. So you had $10,000 of rent coming in. So it would take 10 years for the property to pay for itself. But a flaw is expenses are not part of this calculation. So if you don't do a good job managing expenses, you may never become profitable. The gross rent multiplier reminds me of people who just rely on a price to sales ratio. People who say, oh, the revenue for this company was $1 million 5 years ago. Now it's $100 million at 100x their revenue. Then I may say to the person, they still have negative free cash flow. They're leaking cash every year. Revenue is great, but if you don't become profitable, you can't be a viable business. So once again, using this valuation method combined with others can give you a lot more information. But if you want to take the easy way out, just invest in a REIT. There's so many REITs out there. Lots of them pay a really high dividend. Prologis is the biggest REIT. It's an industrial REIT, 120 billion market cap. It does have negative 3.4 billion of free cash flow in the trailing 12 months. They do pay a tiny dividend of 2%, but some of these companies pay a hefty dividend, 9%, 8%. But you have to remember, when you invest in a REIT, MLP, or BDC, you generally pay the higher income tax, the ordinary income tax, which is 10 to 37% depending on your income. But if you invest in a company like Apple and hold the stock for at least 3 months, then you pay qualified taxes on your dividends, 0 to 20% depending on your income. And when you invest in a REIT, you don't have to deal with any of the headaches of developing a property or managing one. They do it all for you and pay you a dividend. And you can only lose your investment when you invest in a stock. If you are a real estate developer or flipping homes, you could lose everything. But greater risk means greater reward. Hope you learned something new. Please leave a comment, subscribe, like the video. Talk to you soon.